July and August, about 500,000 people were displaced. So about 10,000 ended up in this camp that we're going to show you, and I had a chance to just talk to families and sit down with children in that camp, and it'll just give you an idea of the situation for them. I mean, IDPs is not only a problem in Iraq, of course, it's one of the major countries. There's 38 million IDPs in the world right now. It's a much larger number than even refugees themselves. Iraq, Syria, Congo, Nigeria, South Sudan are the first places for IDP displacement. So my Iraq story, actually, I just finished it yesterday. It goes to air this Sunday across Canada on Global. I think it's 9:30 a.m. across in Ontario. And yeah, we're talking about the displacement there if you want to check it out. And I was also in Jordan, reporting on Syrian refugees. Oh, did we play that video? The situation for a lot of these people. So these are the poorest of the poor. A lot of the families that had any kind of savings were here at the beginning of July or August, and then they moved them out into different places. These are the people that cannot afford rental spaces in our deal. And so we met a lot of the children. You can see the areas, the tents. I mean, we went to refugee camps in Jordan, and they were not makeshift shelters. They were all concrete structures. And so this is much, much different. This is one of the poorest areas we've been to. Yeah, you can see, I mean, the kids do what they want to do, but kids don't forget that they're kids, which is really beautiful. But yeah, so we're going to share some of their stories later on. But this just gives you an idea of what people are living in, and these temperatures are going to get to plus 50 degrees in a couple weeks. So we're dealing with a very difficult way of living for sure. I was also in Jordan reporting on Syrian refugees. I was a CTV anchor for years, and I think even talking about the situation for years and years, sometimes you forget how many people are affected. So 220,000 Syrians have died. That is staggering. 11 million people have been displaced. 7 million within Syria itself. 4 million have fled into different countries. So Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt have taken in the majority of those people. So we'll just go to the next video, which kind of gives us a little bit of an idea about Jordan. This other one is it's an actual video from a donor script that I'm doing. So just bear with all the video that's here. So my focus there's about 600,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan. Okay, so about 100,000 are in 2 big refugee camps we had a chance to go to, and the rest, about 80% of the people, are actually in private settings. So the interesting thing I found about Syrian refugees is that many people are from middle-class families, educated families, and so it's not poverty going to another poverty situation. It is oftentimes families that I think of Canadian middle-class families that would get displaced, and 3, 4, 5 years later, they're sitting in very small homes, can barely provide for their kids, and even people that had savings, say 3 years ago, a lot of that is gone away. You cannot work in Jordan if you are Syrian, so that's a big problem. Our big focus was on lost scholars, so university students that were dragged out of the classroom and are sitting around 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. So we have to sit down with medical students, law students, many different children. This may be interesting to you. So between 15 to 24-year-olds in Syria, they had a 95% literacy rate. So that's what we're dealing with, 77% literacy rate amongst females, more females than males in universities. So like very educated population. There's so many barriers to school, right? School is more expensive in Jordan. Your transcripts have to be physically picked up in Syria. So many of the families we met, you had to flee in the night to get away from either the civil war or ISIS in your towns. So you don't have time to pick up your transcripts, and they have to physically go back to get them. So you have to risk your life basically for school. A lack of transportation. We don't have the majority of people in refugee camps. As you can see, these guys are in a private setting, and so there's no organized transportation to school, even if you could afford it. There's many students we met that could afford it at the beginning, and 3 years later, their family savings are depleted, and so they just can't go back to school. This boy here was a law student, and he was just telling me how he's incredibly depressed over the whole situation. He's bagging groceries right now under the table, and him and his brother and his dad was explaining to me how, I mean, I've raised my kids to be educated individuals. We pride ourselves on these things, and now they're bagging groceries. So it just gives you an idea of what life is like for these people. The international community is providing primary and secondary education for children there. So up to 18, there are opportunities, but basically beyond that, there isn't anything. And because of that, a lot of parents are not even sending their kids to primary or secondary school, which is a big problem because it's a looming problem that's only going to get worse as the years go on. So we visited different refugee camps where there were school settings and places. You can probably just fast forward a little bit, that show, we talked to different students, and even the ones that are in school were very hopeless because they know that at some point there's an expiry date to what they're doing. So it was a really, really tough time just to see all of that. One thing I found interesting with the UN, even UN refugees obviously is in charge of all these different camps and even people in private settings, and they have different target groups. So if you look on their website, you can see, 0 to 4, 4 to 12, 12 to 17, and then the next category is 18 to 59. So when I even asked them, like, how many university age students are here? We don't know, which, you can't even target that population. You don't even know how many people are affected. So that's a story that we're going to roll out in the fall. I'm going to be working on that over the next few months, but this gives you an idea of just some of the students that we met. This is a snapshot of my stories, but of course we want to dig deeper into the material. You can ask me questions later, but I just wanted to give you guys a more rounded view of the situation, I guess, wider than just, of course, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. So the world has the highest number of forcibly displaced people since World War I. More than 50 million people. That includes both IDPs and refugees. So repatriation worldwide is at a 20-year low right now, and conflicts are lasting longer. So the UN refugees actually cares for about 10 million refugees, and they say that at least half of those people have been in exile for more than 5 years. So this is it's a continuing process. You have to figure out what do we do with these people? Where do they go? And that's kind of why we're here, to talk with the experts and see what they have to say about it. So we will bring in our experts to weigh in on our wider security discussion. The first question I have for both of you guys: as more countries struggle with the threats of domestic terrorism and instability, will refugees and IDPs be considered a security threat? Go to Dr. Attack first.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you for this really interesting presentation and the videos. I also thank the organizers of this event for the invitation. It's great. To answer the first question, yes, migrants are considered and more portrayed and treated as a threat, as a security threat. It's not a recent trend. It's been there, this trend, since 1980s, so it's been more than 30 years. But not all migrants. For example, the internally displaced persons you referred to, so those are people who didn't cross any international border. They are stuck in their own countries. From Canada or from the European Union, they are not really perspectives. They are not really considered as security threats. We consider and we treat, our governments treat migrants as a security threat, but only asylum seekers and undocumented migrants. So they are considered as security threats. They are associated with terrorists, etc. In Canada, just to give you an example, the typical example is the treatment of Tamil asylum seekers who arrived by boat off the West Coast in 2009 and 2010. The government referred to the migrants' alleged link to passengers, alleged link to Tamil tigers, to label them as terrorists. Our government has also referred to the passengers on these boats, the fact that they were smuggled into Canada, to depict them as criminals. So in these particular cases, they were portrayed, depicted, and treated as security threats, as terrorists, as criminals. So these were undocumented migrants, these were asylum seekers, people fleeing persecution in their home countries. Another example, more recent example, is the European situation. I'm sure you're familiar with what's going on recently today in Europe. Since January, more than 100,000 people crossed the Mediterranean from Libya basically to Italy. More than 100,000 illegally, and the majority of them again are asylum seekers fleeing conflicts in Syria, in Eritrea, in Somalia, war zones. And they were also depicted, portrayed, and treated as criminals. Some of them also are as terrorists. For example, in response to the increasing number of arrivals to Italy, European Union hold an emergency meeting and adopted last month in May a 10-point plan of action. When you read these 10 points, you can clearly see how they are considered as a security threat. For example, they are considering the use of the military against smugglers' boats, sinking the boats, and as an easy way to deal with migrants, asylum seekers. So they consider it as a war, and there's so little reference to addressing the root causes of these massive displacements. The root causes are obviously war, conflict, serious human rights violations in Somalia, Eritrea, Syria, and so on and so forth. Also, a British columnist wrote in the tabloid The Sun in May, a few weeks ago, that migrants were like cockroaches and suggested that gunships be dispatched to prevent further arrivals. This stereotyped political and media representation also contributes to the treatment of migrants as terrorists or as criminals. So yes, they are considered and treated as security threats, yet there is no evidence that they pose a security threat. They are not terrorists, they are not criminals. There are documented research conducted in Canada, in Europe, and in other countries such as Australia that show very clearly that migrants are not supporters or potential contributors to terrorist activities. There is also research showing that migrants, including undocumented migrants, are less involved in criminal activity than the rest of the population. And I also should like to mention that undocumented migration is not a crime. An individual who illegally crosses an international border and stays legally on the territory of the state doesn't harm a specific individual, doesn't harm any property. So it's not a crime as such. And according to international law, states should not penalize asylum seekers, those who are fleeing conflicts, political violence in their home countries, for irregular arrival. So what our government did with the Tamil asylum seekers a few years ago was illegal in terms of the our international obligations, especially in terms of the refugee convention that we accepted and that we have to implement.
Francisco, security threat?
Well, I will give you a personal kind of view in terms of this. I am from El Salvador. I came to Canada 25 years ago. I was almost killed several times by the death squad in El Salvador, and I was working with the Archbishop office doing human rights investigations. And the last threat that I received and was so serious and I was referring people to the programs that Canada, Australia, United States, Sweden has to bring people at risk in that country directly to Canada or to Sweden or to Australia. So I was referring people, so I knew the channels and whatever. So that time, I went to talk to the senior immigration officer of Canada that was in the Camino Real Hotel, because Canada didn't have an office in El Salvador. And he was there and opened the door to a stranger. And we had this interview, and he basically asked me one question: were you a member of the guerrilla in El Salvador? Because I know your case, I know that you're at risk. I know I have seen the things in the newspaper. I know that. So whatever. So, and the question was, are you a member? Were you a member of the guerrilla? And I was advised to say no, but that was not true. And I was something that I was feeling very proud of myself. That I was a member, and most of my friends are dead now in the civil war. I feel so then I'm going to betray them if I say, well, no, just because I need a visa to go. So I say yes. And he said and explained my role and everything. That was my, and this guy that was with this heavy accent from Quebec, talking to me in Spanish, have an Habano, a cigar, and went to the outside the hotel and started smoking. And 10 minutes later on, he came back and said, "What the heck?" And I started and give me what was called the early admission to Canada because I was at risk. And I have been helping many people in the Canadian embassies to bring people that they go inside the countries, they put their life at risk and whatever, to bring refugees that were, or people that were, in a persecuted, stop country. That doesn't happen anymore. That's because now we are seeing, refugees are seen as an enemy. If the government define the wars that happen in different places as a wars against Canada. So anybody that is in the war zone could be an enemy. And and the other thing that is very problematic is that yeah, no, that's okay. The Canadian policies. So the Canadian policies, they have a direct impact in creating refugees. So if we create that one, and I can put you many examples, I will use just two examples that are very close to my life. One, when I was doing a research, I went to Colombia. And the first thing that I realized almost 15 years ago is that the Canadian government was financially supporting the change of one particular law in Colombia that was the mining law. And then they changed the mining law that was supported by Canada. And then the Canadian corporations, mining corporations, went inside Colombia. And this created a serious problem because they start indirectly getting involved in internal displaced people. Because where was these huge places with many minerals and everything was in the areas of the campesinos, and the paramilitaries and the guerrilla were fighting there, so they used it, they displaced people, and they took over, the companies took over this and exploit this. And we have people that have been claiming refugee status in Canada due to the internal displace that was created by Canadian mines. So in that case, and now we have bombings in different parts of the country or of the world that imply that they are using violence and they are attacking and whatever. When 25 years ago we were defined as the natural peacekeepers, the natural peace builders. Well, now in order to build the peace, we are destroying and we are involved in different things. So when I came to Canada, that is the other thing that for me is a very important for me to say is I came to Canada, I learned that Canada has an agreement with Europe where many refugees that escaped, people that escaped from the Eastern Europe and came to Europe, Germany, France, wherever, Europe considered them as a threat, security threat. But this is very interesting. They were not sent back. You know what they were sent? To Canada, to United States, to Australia, because that was the evaluation that they did. The threat was if they stay in Europe, but if we send them somewhere else, so that was not a problem. Try to convince now our immigration officer and our citizens that that's the way to go, to bring people that born in the conflict, but they want to escape, they want to have a future or whatever, to bring it to Canada very far away. They won't do it. So for me, the whole change in the security is the direct involvement of Canada in the different activities that create persecution directly or indirectly, that create internal displays or forced internal displays. And therefore, there is an ideological position. When I was in El Salvador defending human rights, I was accused by that government to be a terrorist myself. Now we use the term terrorism as a blank check to tell everybody else that is not supporting an agenda from God, which is, in my opinion, a very confrontative expression. And my last point is, you see the radicalism of people inside Canada and inside many other countries. Why is that? If you said then that is created, or this environment is created by the isolation, the marginalization, and the racism that our society has against different national groups, particularly Muslims. They will say, no, 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 you have been apologetic. This is not Canadian. Where is not Canadian? Of course it's not. But what is not Canadian is that we put bombs and whatever, no. But the other effects of discrimination, marginalization, racism, we have to check our history. And if not, just read the report about about the native people of Canada and the residential schools. Do you think there was no racism? Do you think there was no discrimination? We have a history of discriminating in terms of immigration. We have a history of discriminating. Do you know the head tax that was imposed to China? Was security threat? No security threat. Was pure racism. So we have to move from there. But if we are defining policies like the CEDA exists now? No. Who give the money now? DFA. Why? Because it's linked to our political appreciation of the world and is supporting political alternatives internationally. And this is a very clear. So that's an ideological position. In the most rationalized way, trying to implement a humanitarian agenda when the Western democracies are involved in the exploitation, direct exploitation of people, and creating all of these conditions in the global south. And I'm not talking only about war. So the maquilas, we have where we don't have these factories that produce things for the West. Everywhere. You can pick. And the question is, do you produce things for Canada? How much money do you receive? No, yeah, but we didn't know about that conditions. But the conditions happen. So if we don't stop this situation, of course, the easy way out is to impose a security agenda that is going to leave that threat, between quotations, of refugees and internally displaced people to come to Canada, because we consider them as a potential enemies.
Francisco, just a follow-up. I mean, what kind of fair screening then do you need to have? Because these are people coming from different places in the world. Many of the people that I met in these countries, young people, were really angry. Some of the anger and the trauma that they've gone through is quite intense. I mean, how do we actually screen people coming into our country to make sure that there is not a safety issue of any sort?
The issues has to be treated for experts in the different things, in the different disciplines. If you're talking about, a mental issue that we assess, well, we have experts here. If you talk about a level of frustration, a level of radicalism, we can work this out, but just to keep it them and us is not the solution. Because let me put an example that happened. If someone commit a crime here, you know what the government does? They send it home. So, but what? Hell, hello. We have a case in Hamilton, for instance, where we detect, and I said we detect because we were involved in, localizing and identifying a network of people that were doing human trafficking. So these guys went to court and they were condemned here. They were found guilty. And the prison was 12 years in prison. And the lawyer negotiate with the crown and everything, where they are walking freely in this street of Hungary. So that's the way that we deal with our crimes as well? No. The problem is that it's a very easy way out to say, this is not our problem. Keep it there, then and us. No, I'm saying, no, we have to get involved in medical issues, in social issues, in economic issues, in trade issues, and we start to give them a possibility to be like us and to live like us, but not treat them like, what is cheaper? To bring a refugee to Canada and to make them live here, or to keep it then in a refugee camp close in Libya or in Egypt? It's very cheap to keep them there. And the Western democracies are, guilty because they are doing this concept rationally. And that's why I said, if we have a problem, we have to deal with all the disciplinary issues, experts and everything, and start treating this as a human issue, not as a criminal issue. And you see our prime minister, then he said, how many women here in Canada, native origin, have been disappearing? 1,000, no? More than 1,000. We are requesting an inquiry. And what is the response? It's a criminal issue. So, okay, great. No? So that's the response that we have for the security threats, for the refugee. No, that could be a criminal situation, that could be a terrorism. We don't get involved. So, in my opinion, that's the worst thing that could happen, because what is happening is that we are confronting more and radicalizing more all the conflicts that we have, because we are not treating people with dignity. We are excluding them, and that's the worst thing that could happen.
What is the biggest effect you see of treating refugees, migrants?
Yeah, just to answer, so I totally agree with Francisco. Just to say that we have the means to exclude the security threats, to avoid the security threats. Our Immigration and Refugee Protection Act is a very complex piece of legislation, and when Canada selects its permanent residents, its temporary workers, it has the means, financial, administrative, and other means to make sure that the people who are representing a security threat are not selected as future citizens of Canada. The same thing with refugees. So we don't have the means of selecting the refugees, because those are people who are fleeing their countries, and we have a humanitarian approach and humanitarian duties to admit them. But our system also foresees the exclusion of refugees who are representing security threats. If they are terrorists, if they are involved in serious criminality, etc., we have the means to send them back. But in doing so, we have to make sure that we respect our human rights obligations, our charter obligations. For example, we cannot send back a person, even a person who is involved in serious criminality, to a place where this person's life and security would be threatened. Because we do not torture people, we do not implement death penalty, and we cannot send a person, a terrorist, in a place where his life and security would be threatened. This person
Do you think that there are instances where it is good to send them back? Because it seems like Francisco is saying that's a bad option.
There are no instances. If the life and security of this person would be threatened in a place where this person will be sent.
And the majority of people that we have identified in Canada as a threat have been identified by the communities, by the family, by friends, by members of the communities. So the communities here in Canada, refugee communities, are very vigilant about the whole situation. And they have been reporting people. The problem is that our system doesn't do anything about it. They are starting to do something about it because of radicalization. But But this issue has been here for 30 years. And we have been saying, if not read the reports, that there is 700 or 800 criminals of war living in Canada legally now that have been accepted by the Canadian government, and they are now Canadian citizens and all this stuff. They have the information. Who have provided this information? The refugee communities and the immigrant communities, and the society itself. So we have mechanisms of protection because we don't want to be tortured and killed here in Canada either, and we want to protect our new home. Not everybody like that, but we have to build this trust again that is missing in this whole country.
Canada seeks to settle 10,000 Syrian refugees. We've had a backlog in terms of bringing in Syrian refugees and meeting our targets even the last couple of years, and that was only 1,300. Is this an actual feasible goal, though? We were talking about that we have capacity. Do we actually have capacity?
Well, yeah, we have capacity. What we don't have is the political will. And, for instance, this what the heck that happened 25 years ago when someone signed my papers. Now, if an officer have an interview and have a small doubt about something, they put the file at the bottom of the thing and they don't take it. So how we are going to bring these people? Then everybody come from Syria, from these countries. If I said, where is your brother? My brother is inside Syria. And, and start the investigation about maybe family members that are inside and what they are doing and whatever, and they don't have the capacity to see what is happening in Syria. So what they do, they put the file. And so the file of people that may be accepted in their security check still is huge. So in that case, they can say 50,000. And I believe that they are not going to bring it. They can say 10. They are using small numbers because they say, maybe God help us. And somehow we are going to bring at least half of them. But the intention, even though it's on paper, due to this new culture of feeling threat, when you go to these countries and to these refugee camps, they are not going to be processed. We are now having even issues than before didn't exist with families. Because what about the husband? What about this 17 years old, maybe radicalized? And there is many questions already. They are not discussing about the case. They are discussing about the political policy, the policy of Canada in that particular case and how that may be affected. So they are speculating about possible actions. And it's so unfair to speculate and to define someone a potential security threat when it's nothing to base on that threat, only the nationality and maybe some history that families are inside Syria, whatever. This is the problem. We don't have a way to refuse people. We have a big way to accept. But because the culture is so oppressive and they are so scared, Immigration Canada is saying, remember that if you approve a case, the filter is that you may appear in the Toronto Star, that you approve that case. So who is going to do it?
So the question is, though, what?
No, that's the question. So that's why we are saying, if we really want to do a political, a refugee approach, we have to go with multidisciplinary teams to the refugee camps. And we start trying to identify the issues and try to define priorities in basis of the conditions of the refugee camps. And start bringing people, gradually. You can have the lower cases, for instance, of risk. Bring children and are orphans. For instance, if you don't want to have it's very expensive. So it's better to bring it with a family. But the family could be a risk. So you can pick many elements and sectors that don't define a serious risk to Canada, but they don't do it either that way.
And there isn't a multidisciplinary approach as of
No.
right now in terms of bringing anybody in.
No.
What we see, so what we see is increasingly what we call the Department of Criminology as a criminalization of migration, including refugees, which means that we consider refugee and migration as a criminal issue and impose criminal sanctions against people who are not criminals, who are not terrorists. I referred a few minutes ago to these boat arrivals of tunnel asylum seekers 6 years ago. And Canada's response was to criminalize these arrivals and these people. What our government did is to adopt a law, Bill C-31, which entered into force in 2012, 3 years ago, and which foresees a series of repressive measures against asylum seekers, against refugees. So don't forget, these are really people who are fleeing a conflict. They are persecuted. They have a well-founded fear of persecution based on their race, nationality, ethnicity, etc. So repressive measures, more and more criminal sanctions against them. For example, detention. Mandatory detention. So they arrive and we put them in detention centers, including of children. Now, Canada is detaining children aged 16 and 17. And children who are younger than 16 have the option. Either they go into detention with their family and mother, or they are given to foster care. We are a free and democratic society according to our charter, and we are detaining children. And also the reduction of procedural rights, access to legal aid, access to lawyer, access to counsel, etc. It's a huge challenge, especially when they are detained. So these are really unacceptable measures that Canada is implementing. Canada is not alone.
No, no,
European
no.
Union countries, Australia had also very repressive policies against these people who didn't come with any help.
And for instance, the cut on the interim federal health program for refugees. The cut, we are saying, give them more options. Give them a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a doctor, a this and that, in order that the person can be assessed and we can put all the resources together to give them a better future in Canada right from the beginning. We cut enough. And now it's in court and we are fighting against the federal government. And the term bogus refugees that the government create. If you check our law, never ever that term bogus is used legally. You can say, I don't believe in your claim. You have a credibility issues. But the law doesn't say you are a liar. No. You haven't been able to prove your allegations. So it's very respectful in the text of the law. But when the government implemented, you become a bogus because you were not accepted. Bogus is a liar, a person that fabricates the whole thing. So you come in money walking on the street after someone say to you, you are a bogus, you are a liar. You don't deserve to be here. So, and that's the conflict that we are creating. So the medical thing is one of the main issues that is affecting refugees, and we are not going move forward. We are going backwards in the whole approach with refugees.
I think Canadians, people in this room probably pride themselves on multiculturalism, that ability to accept people. But Francisco talked a little bit about the racism, xenophobia exists when different people groups come in. I mean, how do we approach that in terms of resettling new people in here and even getting the Canadian public on your side?
I was very depressed a few years ago because all the polls that I was reading, they were saying that the Canadian public is basically believing or starting to accept this that refugees could be a threat and all of this stuff. And the good news, in my opinion, is that we have cities in this country that are willing to stand up for the rights of the poorest of the poor, like Toronto. They approve become a sanctuary city for immigrants and poor immigrants, because the rich immigrants, they have a way to regularize themselves. We are talking about workers and whatever. And that gives me a way new hope, because if there is a city, and now it's Hamilton as well, that they passed the motion, that they define the city of Hamilton as a sanctuary city. If there is city councilors that are very aware of the issue, and there is the city workers, and there is the city shelters, and there is all of these services that we provide, and they are identifying people that have been marginalized for years. And this city wants to commit to make a change, because the integration happened locally, not federal. So, and if the city of Toronto is willing to give them a chance again to become a dignified human beings, so that gives me a lot of hope. And I think that's the way to go. When the issue of immigrants and refugees is not taken as an immigration issue, it's taken as a social issue, as a humanistic issue, where we have to provide the best that we can to the brothers and sisters that are in need. And that's what we have to do. To go back to this idea, I don't want to have an open society, don't take me wrong, you know. But if a person managed to come to Canada, why we don't give them a chance to live here peacefully if that's what they want? You know what I mean? And to give them a fair chance. So that's why the city of Toronto is the one that has given me a chance to have a hope again. And we are very committed with the city, working almost every day to training city staff, to open programs. We are working now in another program, and it's the anti-trafficking, anti-human trafficking from the city of Toronto. They don't have budget, they don't have resources, but we are moving forward a possibility, a light, a hope for these people that are here, and they are here to stay. And some of them, they have Canadian children. They are going to school, and the parents are from everywhere and don't have a legal status, and they are almost facing deportation. They are going to destroy the families if that deportation happens. So we are looking for a better solution for that particular family. So that gives me.
Francisco referred to the discourse, the bogus refugees. So this negative discourse is we're seeing it in Canada over the past 5-6 years, more even, but 5-6 years it was really a lot of negative discourse, stereotype discourse.
Almost 10 years to be specific with the conservative way.
Right, and so bogus refugees, abusers, there are people portrayed as people abusing the system, threatening the integrity of our system, costing huge amounts of money to taxpayers, etc. So this kind of discourse in Canada, but also in other developed countries, are changing the public perception of with regard to asylum seekers, with regard to undocumented migrants, but also with regard to legal migrants as well. So public perception and changing the discourse is very important. I totally agree with Francisco in this regard. What I'm doing, because I'm a professor, I'm teaching at Ryerson, I'm teaching criminology students, undergrad students, and I'm trying to contribute to this process of changing the perception, informing my students about the rights, etc. So one of the questions that I ask to my students is, because we're talking about all these problems facing undocumented migrants, asylum seekers, recent changes, etc. The question that I ask to them is, do you think undocumented migrants have rights, human rights? And then and I ask them to raise their hands, do you think that they have rights? Human rights. And my students, the majority of them think that they have human rights. So some of them think that yes, they have, but the majority think that because they are undocumented, because they are illegal, they illegally crossed and they illegally stayed in Canada, they do not have any human rights. So what I say to them, what I tell to them is that they do have human rights. Why? Because they are human beings. Okay, and when you read our charter, the fabulous Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, all of the rights and freedoms set forth in this charter are applicable to migrants, undocumented migrants, also to asylum seekers. Why? Because they are human beings. So I'm trying to change the discourse. I'm trying to change the perceptions.
To give you a personal experience, as I said, I came to Canada 25 years ago, and the whole experience and whatever. And I am very proud, and I am profiled at the Canadian Human Rights Museum now as a role model from the Central America influx of people that came in during all this period of time that Canada brought around 35 to 40,000 people from that region. So I am a writer. I was a professional. I was teaching in university. I am a researcher, public analyst, whatever. No, and we have a Colombian guy that have for me the same profile. Writer, professor of university, researcher, human rights investigator, and whatever. And he was accused of being supportive of a political opposition in Canada, in Colombia. And his permanent resident status was uh, seized, because they didn't give it for 12 years. And I was talking to everybody, said, look, my profile is exactly the same. How that happened? And it's the perception. It's the perception, and now he received it because we have to go to court to do a mandamus to force the government to provide an answer about the application for permanent residence. And they realized that it was bullshit. They realized it. They said, how we are going to go and explain to the court that we haven't give this person something without having any reasons in the file. And they give it to them in 2 weeks after waiting for 12 years. That's the type of perception that materialize in a very, how can I say, very sad implementations. Because then you go to the officer, then you go to the public servant that interiorize that policies and that concept, and they believe that they are implementing this one and they are protecting Canada from terrorism. How we are going to go to that level? We have to change the whole political spectrum. In terms of the approach, the discourse, the narrative that we are creating against refugees and immigrants, in order that we have a chance to go back to a fair system that we had before.
And that's exemplified with Bill C-42, second-class citizen.
Exactly.
Right?
Them and us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have lots of questions, but I'm sure you guys have questions as well. So I'll open it up to the floor if anyone wants to throw something out.
I'd like to go to second part, security threat. Like I personally think Canadians are very, or there is a racism. There is, you can say racism, or you can say lack of experience. Let's say I came 49 years ago, started 50 years ago. So I taught here at the university. So I face some racism. So I think there are some concerns, but now I'm so much concerned about the security, my fellow Canadian security, people coming from mainly from these countries, Syria and Iraq, and they have connection back with ISIS group, and they want to help them. And some, the some cases from Montreal, 6, 7 people, they were arrested. They were just about to leave, young people, and they come, and a lot of people we don't know they support ISIS, which is considered to be threat to all of us, threat to democracies. And what are we going to do? What's the government are doing? What's our policies? So maybe would you like to have comment on that? I'm seriously
I think same with my friends. We are really concerned.
Um, yeah, with regard to terrorism, when you link terrorism to migration, you don't really take into account the attacks by domestic groups. For example, my um, home country, which is Turkey, well, terrorism was caused over the past, I would say, 40, 30 years by a domestic group, which is a PKK, etc. It calmed down now, fortunately. And it was the same in London, for example, London bombings a few years ago. And I have an example here, Toronto 17
Yeah.
in 2005. These were 17 individuals of Muslim faith arrested in 2005 on the presumption that they would be involved in terrorist activities, and they were all Canadian citizens. I would not agree with this direct link between migrants and terrorism. But the example that you give, ISIS activities, um, I know that the migrants, those who are coming to Canada legally, they are subject to extensive security checks. So they are fingerprinted, and all this information, personal information, are collected, and there is a security check um, uh, done by our authorities, and they're very efficient. I myself migrated. I was sponsored by my partner a few years ago. I know that it's very extensive, and they are taking it very seriously. They're doing really a good job in terms of security checks. In terms of asylum seekers, I would say the same thing. Because now they are almost automatically arrested, detained upon arrival, and they are doing a check on their identity to make sure that they are the person they are saying who they are, and also making the security check for undocumented migrants, maybe
Yeah.
Francisco.
No, I totally support the concept, no, because it's very. You have the 9/11 attack.
Yeah.
Well, clearly, that was an attack that was from people, wherever, wherever. No, that is your concept or the concept that you are very scared. I work with immigrants and refugees every single day of my life. I open the door and you can go to my office, and I live in the office with refugees and non-status people. Never ever I have any problem myself because the people is escaping from a very difficult situation. They want to have an ordinary life. You know what I mean? They are not a threat. They are threatened. And that's why the UN has a very clear motto, no? Refugees are not a threat. They are threatened. And when I said threatened is, they are threatened not only for the civil war that they are escaping or from the ISIS, they are threatened in the transit to Canada. They have been sometimes uh, incarcerated. They have been exploited by the smugglers, by many people. They come here. They have lost everything and they come to Canada. And our system closed the door for them in many occasions. So, but they are not a threat, believe me. You know what I mean? Review all the statistics of any attacks in Canada and North America where a recent immigrant become a terrorist like that. No, that's no. We don't have a numbers to support that. So in that case, we will have to pay more attention about our own products, our own Canadian citizens that came to Canada maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, or they were born here to an immigrant family. Then they are isolated and they have many things. We have to pay attention to that, not to immigration. The issue of immigration, in my opinion, haven't been proved that it's a security threat. We want to believe it is to close the borders and to remove people, but we don't have the statistics to prove it.
And I would say too, just from my experience of interviewing the displaced families and children in Iraq, these are people that have fled this group 3, 4, 5 times in the last 7, 8 months. If anybody is more angry with what they're doing to their country and how they're destroying their lives, it's not that they're going to side with them. They're so frustrated. And the fact, like, even in the Middle East, I really learned people, like, their home and where they're from. I mean, some of these families have been there for thousands of years, like their family lines. And for them to actually even think of leaving their country is such a big deal. Like, some people were explaining to me, this is such a huge deal for us to even dream of going to Canada, even though Canada represents maybe this more peaceful place. Like, us leaving our family lines in our country is just so difficult for us. But that's how bad it is. And they were saying this is how much we hate what these people are doing to our country. So at least in the people that I met, I was completely like, they want to flee it because they are totally against what they're doing and they don't want their children to be killed. So it was just an interesting.
What I see is maybe the way I perform here. This is my new home, new country, so I sport here. I don't dwell back home what happened to my parents but these people, I'm sorry to isolate Islam. These security threats coming up, a group of 17 or 19 or others, the attack, they're all coming from that Middle East or other, from Islamic. I don't know why they dwell, they bring or they think about their issues back home. I don't know why. Why don't they come and live here peacefully and support? I know there's no control. Anybody, individual can be criminal here too. Anybody. What can you do? Then the law takes care of them.
It's not Islamic. I come from El Salvador. You know how many people are killed in El Salvador? That we have 6.5 million living in a very small, tiny piece of land. 17 people are killed daily, and we are not Muslims. The majority of us, we are Catholic. You know what I mean? Or Christians or whatever. No, you have to analyze the issues in terms of oppression, poverty, discrimination, isolation. You know, who was supporting all of these forces 10 years ago? The Americans. And now they are enemies totally. What is so we have to do an assessment of our own sins. And I think to see Muslims as an issue is a very have a you can use it if you want, but the issue is not that one. This is a link among societies. It's like the women, the violence against women. This is a link among societies that we have to be very aware.
Well, I think what he's saying is right, actually, Mr. Chair. That Mr. Rick McFadden, the last Canadian Security Analyst Director, he said the same thing, actually, that the main threat to Canada 5 to 7 years from now is from this migrating population of refugees. Because 90% of criminals are coming here to Canada. No other country is accepting them because of the relaxed humanitarian laws. So what these guys are doing is they're camping, staging themselves for the next 5 to 7 years, just to keep the head above water, focusing on their own countries now. But 5 to 7 years from now, they'll have internal clashes here in Canada. That's the report from the Security Intelligence of Canada. So that is what Mr. Ronchal is trying to support, that if we don't tighten, we don't screen properly. I mean, all those humanitarian laws are for the UN, UNDP, there are many organizations looking at them. So why should Canada be a charitable house to house all these people who are finally going to end up destroying the security which Canada enjoys now? That is a report by CSIS. Mr. Richard McFadden lost his job by just saying this in a closed-door meeting at the RCM. I don't know whether Rob was there. He lost his job the next day because it was supposed to be a closed-door meeting, but some chap from the Islamic reported in the newspapers, and next he had to resign, only because of this reason. So it's a major security threat. Regardless of what you may say, humanitarian or not humanitarian, they're treating Canada as a dumping ground for criminals.
I don't know the statistics, so I won't be able to comment on that.
meaning seekers. And as I said, our asylum system is becoming more and more mandatory detention, which 12 months, and we also detain children. I think our authorities are doing what is necessary, what is needed in terms of protecting our security. What I would like to say is that we also have, as Canadian Charter of Human Rights, so we have to be aware of that and make sure that the rights of the most vulnerable populations in our society, including undocumented migrants and asylum seekers, are protected. We also have this wonderful humanitarian tradition. Security and human rights are not set in a zero-sum game. So there is no need for a trade-off between them. We can protect our security, and we have CISIS, we have CBSA, we have our CMP, we have a wonderful security system to protect our borders and our security in land. We can at the same time protect our humanitarian tradition and rights and freedoms of vulnerable people.
Hi. I just have a quick question. You were talking about like the boats in British Columbia and the Tamil.